Sometimes life shatters not with storms, but with whispers of betrayal that cut deeper than a knife. This is the story of Aisha, whose world turned upside down just days before her wedding. Aisha had always believed that her life was finally aligning with her dreams. At 26, she had spent years balancing work, family, and her own quiet hopes for a loving marriage. When Fahad entered her life, it seemed like the universe had finally smiled upon her. He was charming, well-spoken, and came from a respectable family in London. His proposal had filled Aisha's parents with joy, and the wedding preparations began almost instantly. Her home buzzed with excitement, relatives visiting, shopping trips for bridal dresses, endless discussions about jewelry, and the anticipation of a grand wedding reception. For Aisha, every decorated corner of her house whispered promises of a bright future. She would often look at her bridal dress hanging in the cupboard, imagining the day she would wear it. But as fate would have it, perfection was only an illusion. Just a week before the wedding, Aisha received a phone call that cracked her world open. On the other end was a trembling voice, an acquaintance from her university days. With hesitation, the woman told her that Fahad was not who he claimed to be. Rumors swirled that he was already involved with someone else, a woman he had been meeting secretly for months. At first, Aisha dismissed it as jealousy or malice, but as the hours passed, unease grew inside her like a poisonous seed. She confronted Fahad indirectly, asking casual questions, watching his expressions, listening for cracks in his stories. And there they were, tiny inconsistencies, hurried excuses, a sudden defensiveness. Aisha's heart sank with every word he spoke. The more she observed, the clearer it became. The rumors were not baseless. The truth hit her harder than she had imagined. Fahad was indeed cheating on her, entertaining another woman while promising Aisha a life of loyalty and love. When she finally broke the news to her parents, silence filled the room like heavy smoke. Her father's face hardened, and her mother broke into tears. Their pride was wounded, their trust betrayed, and their daughter's happiness shattered. Relatives whispered in shock. Neighbors pretended to sympathize, while secretly gossiping about the broken engagement. The shame felt unbearable. But Aisha knew she couldn't spend her life with a man whose love was a lie. The wedding was called off. The decorations came down. The guests were informed. And the dress she once adored now hung lifeless in her cupboard. Like a cruel reminder of broken dreams, Aisha retreated into herself in the days that followed. Nights were sleepless, mornings were heavy, and her once lively eyes dulled with pain. She replayed every memory with Fahad, every promise, every smile, and wondered how easily he had deceived her. Yet, within her heartbreak, something else began to grow. A strange strength whispered to her, "Maybe. This ending is not your downfall, but your beginning." And though she didn't yet know it, her life was about to take a turn that would change her forever. When life burns down the bridges we thought would carry us to happiness, sometimes it secretly opens doors we never imagined. For Aisha, heartbreak was about to lead her to something far greater than she could ever dream of. The days after her broken engagement were heavy with silence. Aisha avoided meeting relatives, stayed away from wedding halls, and spent hours staring out of her window, wondering why destiny had humiliated her in such a cruel way. The once bright girl who had been full of plans now felt like a shadow of herself. Her parents, though supportive, were equally weighed down by society's whispers. Every time her mother stepped out to the market, she returned with stories of people asking uncomfortable questions. Why was the wedding canceled? Was it Aisha's fault? Did she do something wrong? The cruel rumors cut deep, but within the four walls of her room, Aisha's heart began asking her a new question. What if this heartbreak is a chance to build myself again? What if I'm meant for something beyond a broken marriage? To distract herself, she started reading books she had long abandoned. Stories of women who rebuilt their lives after betrayals. Stories of courage and stories of independence began to inspire her. Slowly, a thought began to take root. Perhaps she needed to focus on herself, her career, and her passions instead of drowning in sorrow. It was during one of those restless nights, while scrolling through her phone, that she stumbled upon an online advertisement. Interior Design Workshop. Transform your passion into a career. Aisha had always loved home decor. Her friends often admired the way she decorated her room, her knack for picking colors, and her eye for detail. But she had never taken it seriously as a career. Marriage had always been the bigger goal. Now, with marriage no longer in the picture, the idea of shaping a future with her own hands sparked something inside her. The very next day, she enrolled in the workshop. At first, it was intimidating. New faces, new environment, and the haunting thought that people might judge her. But to her surprise, the workshop became a sanctuary. She found herself surrounded by people who shared her passion, people who were too busy chasing their dreams to gossip about others. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe again. Among the participants was a man named Danish. He was polite, respectful, and carried himself with quiet confidence. Unlike Fahad, he wasn't flashy or loud. Instead, he spoke with sincerity that felt refreshing. He often noticed Aisha's creative ideas during group projects and encouraged her, saying she had a natural gift. Though hesitant at first, Aisha began opening up in conversations with him. Danish never asked about her past, and she never offered it. With him, she could simply be herself. Not the girl whose wedding was canceled, but a woman with dreams, talent, and potential. Weeks turned into months, and Aisha began transforming before her own eyes. Her heartbreak, though still lingering like an old scar, no longer defined her. She started taking freelance projects, designing small living spaces, and slowly earning her own income. Every piece she completed filled her with pride, a kind of fulfillment she had never felt before. Her parents watched in amazement. The daughter who once cried herself to sleep was now waking up early, sketching ideas, meeting clients, and filling the house with fresh energy. Their worries began to ease as they saw her smile return, not because of a man's promises, but because of her own strength. But destiny once again was not done testing Aisha. Just as her life was beginning to blossom, whispers of Fahad resurfaced. She heard from a friend that his new relationship was already falling apart, and worse, his family had started dropping hints about wanting to mend things with her family. Would Aisha forgive the man who had broken her so deeply? Or would she walk firmly on the new path she had carved for herself? The answer would come soon, but not without a storm. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. It comes knocking, just when you've begun to heal. For Aisha, the wound she thought was closing was about to be torn open again. Life had finally begun to feel normal again. Aisha's mornings were filled with sketches, colors, and client calls. Her evenings often passed in workshops, where her ideas were increasingly recognized. Danish's presence was a quiet comfort in the background, never overwhelming, never demanding, simply supportive. Her parents, relieved to see their daughter thriving, encouraged her to keep moving forward. They even began whispering to each other about the possibility of finding someone new for her when the time was right. For them, Aisha's happiness was more important than society's opinions. But fate had a cruel way of testing resilience. One afternoon, as Aisha was returning from a client meeting, she received an unexpected message. It was from Fahad. Her heart froze at the sight of his name. The man who had shattered her dreams before the entire community was suddenly reaching out as if nothing had happened. The message was simple. Aisha, I made a mistake. Can we talk? Her hands trembled as she read it. Memories she had buried deep came rushing back. The shame of the canceled wedding, the whispered gossip, her mother's tears. For a moment, it felt like she was right back at that painful night. Crushed and humiliated, she ignored the message, but Fahad was persistent. Days later, his mother came to Aisha's home, tears in her eyes, begging for forgiveness. She claimed Fahad had realized his mistake, that his so-called perfect match had turned out to be selfish and disloyal. Now, broken and regretful, he wanted Aisha back. Aisha's parents were caught in a storm of emotions. On one hand, They remembered the humiliation Fahad's betrayal had caused. On the other hand, society had already labeled their daughter as the girl who was left at the altar. If she married Fahad now, wouldn't it silence the gossip and restore their family's pride? But Aisha wasn't the same girl anymore. She had found strength in her independence, and though her heart wavered with old feelings, her mind told her not to step back into the same fire. Still, a part of her wondered, could people truly change? Could regret erase betrayal? The confusion only deepened when Fahad himself showed up one evening outside her workshop. His once confident face now looked tired, almost desperate. He spoke with humility she had never seen in him before, admitting how wrong he had been and how he had ruined not only her life, but his own. "You were always the right one," he confessed, his eyes glistening. "I was blinded by greed and pride. Please, Aisha, give me one more chance." Her heart ached. There was a time when she would have given anything to hear those words. But now, standing there with the weight of her own journey behind her, she felt conflicted. This wasn't just about love anymore. It was about self-respect. Meanwhile, Danish noticed the shift in her mood. Though he never pried, he could sense her restlessness. One evening, during a group discussion, he quietly said, "Sometimes life gives us the same test twice. The real question is, will we answer differently this time?" Those words stayed with her. Aisha knew she was at a crossroads. If she forgave Fahad, she might gain the approval of society and perhaps even ease her parents' burden. But if she refused, she would be choosing herself, her dignity, her growth, and the new path she had begun to walk. The nights grew restless again. The sketchbook that once brought her joy now remained untouched as she wrestled with her thoughts. Her mother, torn between pain and hope, asked her gently, "Beta, what does your heart say?" Aisha didn't reply, because even she wasn't sure. What she didn't know, however, was that her decision would not only define her future, but would also reveal the true faces of those around her. Destiny was preparing another twist, one that would test not just her strength, but her courage to stand alone if needed. Sometimes the hardest choices are not between right and wrong, but between the past we once loved and the future we have yet to trust. For days, Aisha lived in a storm of emotions. Fahad's sudden reappearance had cracked open wounds she thought were healing. His apologies, his mother's pleas, and even her parents' silent hopes weighed heavily on her. It was as if the entire world was waiting for her to forgive him, to mend what had been broken. Everywhere she went, whispers followed her again. Some people said she should forgive. After all, everyone makes mistakes. Others claimed she would be a fool to go back to the man who had humiliated her. The pressure was unbearable. Her parents, caught between protecting their daughter and protecting their honor, sat late into the night discussing what was best. Her father, usually a man of few words, admitted softly, "If you marry him now, people will stop talking. Maybe that's what you need." But her mother, who had cried the most during the betrayal, couldn't bring herself to push Aisha toward him again. "Beta's heart is still fragile," she whispered. "I can't see her break again." Aisha listened, but said little. Inside, her heart waged a silent war. One evening, she sat alone in her workshop, staring at the sketches on her desk. They had once been symbols of freedom, but now they looked empty, lifeless. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, tears fell freely. That's when Danish appeared at the door. He had sensed her absence from the usual gatherings and had come quietly. Without intrusion, he didn't ask questions, didn't lecture. He simply sat across from her, waiting until she chose to speak. Finally, Aisha whispered, "Everyone wants me to forgive him. They think going back will fix everything, but how can I love someone who destroyed my trust?" Danish's voice was calm but firm. "Aisha, forgiveness is noble. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting. And it certainly does not mean giving someone the power to hurt you again. You have already proven your strength once. Don't let guilt or pressure take it away." His words struck her deeply. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't asking her to think about society or her parents' burden. He was asking her to think about herself. The next day, Aisha called Fahad to meet one last time. He arrived, hope shining in his eyes, already imagining reconciliation. But when she stood before him, her face was calm. No longer the girl he had betrayed, but a woman who had learned her worth. "Fahad," she began, her voice steady, "I don't hate you. I truly hope you find happiness. But I cannot walk the same path with you again. Love cannot survive where trust has been buried. And for me, self-respect will always come first." Fahad's smile faded. His pleas grew desperate, but Aisha didn't waver. She turned and walked away, each step firm, leaving behind the chains of her past. The news spread quickly. Some people admired her courage, calling her strong and independent. Others criticized her, saying she had ruined her only chance. But Aisha didn't care anymore. For the first time in a long time, she felt free. At home, her parents were shocked but quietly proud. They had feared she might choose comfort over dignity. But their daughter had shown more strength than they had ever imagined. That night, Aisha opened her sketchbook again. With fresh determination, her pencil moved across the paper, bringing to life designs filled with bold lines and fearless strokes. They were no longer just drawings. They were reflections of her journey. As days passed, Danish continued to stand by her side, not with declarations or expectations, but with actions. He celebrated her small victories, reminded her of her talent, and most importantly, respected her choices. Aisha realized something profound. Love doesn't always come with grand promises or perfect beginnings. Sometimes it grows quietly, nurtured by respect, patience, and kindness. Her heart was not fully healed yet, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the future. She had chosen herself, and in that choice, she had discovered the strength to embrace whatever lay ahead. But life was not done testing her. Just when things seemed to settle, a new opportunity arose, one that would take her beyond the boundaries of her hometown and force her to choose between comfort and ambition. Sometimes, the universe breaks us not to destroy us, but to prepare us for a path far greater than we ever imagined. Weeks passed, and Aisha poured herself into her work. Her sketchbooks filled with bold ideas, and her hands created pieces that reflected not just fabric and design, but resilience and self-respect. Each creation seemed to carry fragments of her journey, as if the stitches were weaving together the broken parts of her soul. One morning, while displaying her work at a small local exhibition, something unexpected happened. Among the visitors was a well-known entrepreneur, Mrs. Shireen Malik, who ran a fashion house in Karachi. She stopped in front of Aisha's designs and stared for a long time, her eyes glimmering with appreciation. "These designs," Shireen said softly, "are fearless. They speak of struggle but also of strength." "Who made them?" Aisha stepped forward, nervous but proud. "I did." Shireen smiled warmly. "Young lady, you have something rare. Have you ever thought of expanding your work beyond this town? Because I see potential not just for you, but for women who dream like you." Her words planted a seed in Aisha's heart. The very idea of moving to a bigger city, of presenting her designs to a wider audience, felt overwhelming. Yet, it also lit a fire inside her. That evening, she told her parents about the opportunity. Her father frowned, his protective instincts surfacing. "Aisha, Karachi is not like here. It's fast, unforgiving, and you have already faced enough pain." Her mother, though worried, placed her hand on Aisha's. "Look, sometimes God sends us chances wrapped in fear. Maybe this is one of them." But not everyone saw it as an opportunity. The same neighbors who once whispered about her broken engagement now murmured again. "She's chasing foolish dreams," one woman scoffed. First, she refused marriage. Now she wants to run to the city. Girls like her don't belong in fashion houses. They belong at home. The words stung, but they no longer had power over Aisha the way they once did. Danish, who had been quietly supporting her, listened to her dilemma one evening as they walked by the riverside. "Aisha," he said, looking out at the water, "dreams are like rivers. If they don't flow, they stagnate. You owe it to yourself to see where this current can take you." His encouragement strengthened her resolve. For the first time, She saw her future not as something handed to her, but as something she could create. Still, the decision was not easy. Moving meant leaving behind her parents, her safe corner, and perhaps even Danish, who had become her silent anchor. She asked herself, was she strong enough to step into a world where failure was a real possibility? The night before giving her answer to Shireen, Aisha couldn't sleep. She walked to her workshop, switched on the dim lamp, and stared at her sketches. Each line, each shade reminded her of how far she had come. Then she whispered to herself, if I survived heartbreak, I can survive this too. The next day, she called Shireen. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. Yes, I'll do it. The moment she said it, she felt both fear and freedom rush through her. It was as though she had opened a door that had always been waiting for her. Preparations began, Aisha's house filled with mixed emotions, her parents helping her pack, her mother sneaking extra prayers into her suitcase, her father pretending to be strong while his eyes betrayed his worry. Before leaving, she visited the seaside one last time with Danish. The waves roared as if echoing her own restless spirit. Danish handed her a small notebook. Write your journey here, he said softly. One day, people will want to know your story. Aisha smiled, her heart heavy yet hopeful. She didn't know what awaited her in Karachi. Success, struggle, or both. But she knew one thing. She was not the same girl who once cried over betrayal. She was a woman walking into the unknown with courage as her companion. And yet, destiny had its own plans. In Karachi, she would face not only challenges in her career, but also a test of her heart, one that would blur the lines between ambition, loyalty, and love. Life often brings us to crossroads, where we must choose between what we want and what we truly need. Aisha was about to face that moment. She joined Fashion House as a junior designer, and from the very beginning, she realized this world was not as glamorous as it looked. It was fierce, demanding, and unforgiving. But Aisha worked harder than anyone else. She stayed late in the studio, perfected every stitch, and poured her soul into her designs. Slowly, she began to stand out. Her colleagues noticed her unique perspective, her ability to weave emotions into fabric. What others saw as just clothes, Aisha created as stories people could wear. Within a year, her designs were chosen for a prestigious fashion show in London. The night of the show, Aisha stood backstage, her heart pounding. Models walked out wearing her creations, and the audience erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, critics scribbled notes, and models stood proudly beside Aisha. For the first time in her life, Aisha felt seen, not as someone's daughter or someone's rejected fiancé, but as herself. She was Aisha, the designer, the dreamer, the woman who turned heartbreak into art. But success came with its own tests. Offers began pouring in. A major investor wanted to collaborate with her to open her own label. Magazines requested interviews. Suddenly, she was no longer the quiet girl from a small town. She was becoming a name people recognized. In the midst of all this, she often thought of home. She missed her mother's prayers, her father's quiet strength, and the peaceful evenings by the riverside. Most of all, she missed Danish. Danish had kept in touch, sending her short messages of encouragement. But distance had created silence between them too. He had never confessed his feelings openly, but his care had always been unspoken love. And now, Aisha wondered if she had left behind something even more precious than her dreams. One evening, after a long meeting with investors, she returned to her apartment to find a letter waiting for her. It was from her father. His words were simple but filled with emotion. "My love, we are proud of you. You are living the dreams we never even dared to imagine. But remember, no matter how high you rise, love and relationships are what make the journey meaningful. Don't let success make you forget what truly matters." The words echoed in her heart. That night, she sat by the window, staring at the city lights, and tears rolled down her cheeks. She asked herself, what was the purpose of success if it left her heart empty? A month later, Aisha traveled back to her hometown for a short visit. The town hadn't changed much, but she had. She walked through the familiar streets, and people who once gossiped about her now whispered in admiration. Some even congratulated her parents, calling her an inspiration. She found Danish by the seaside, sketching quietly in his notebook. When he saw her, surprise lit up his eyes. For a moment, it felt like time had paused. "I saw your fashion show," he said softly, smiling. "You've done it, Aisha. You're living your dream." Aisha looked at him, her heart aching with unspoken words. "Yes, Danish, but dreams, they're not as complete without the people who matter." He closed his notebook, his expression unreadable. "And what matters to you, Aisha?" Her eyes filled with tears as she finally admitted the truth. "You. It's always been you. Through every broken moment, every step forward. You were there. I was too blind to see it before. But now I know." For the first time, Danish let down his guard. "I never wanted to stand in the way of your dreams. I just wanted you to fly. But if, after everything, you still find your way back to me, then maybe it was destiny all along." The waves crashed against the shore as if celebrating their confession. Aisha felt a peace she hadn't felt in years. Success had given her recognition, but love gave her a home. Months later, Aisha launched her own fashion label, not in London, but in her hometown, with the support of the investors who believed in her. Her studio became a place where other young women could learn and grow, a safe space for dreamers who once thought their wings were broken. Danish stood by her side, not just as her partner in life, but as her partner in purpose. Together, they built something that was bigger than themselves, a legacy of hope, courage, and love. And so, the girl who was once broken by betrayal became a woman who inspired countless others. Her story was no longer about heartbreak. It was about rising, choosing wisely, and finding strength in both ambition and love. Because in the end, Aisha learned the greatest truth of all: success shines brightest when it is shared with the people who truly matter.